let's get started here. Thank you guys for coming. Thank you for attending DevFest Florida, as well as this talk on material design. My name is Michael Prentice. I'm based in Melbourne, Florida, just 45 minutes east on the coast here. I run a software consulting company called DevIntent, and I'm also an active open source contributor to AngularJS and Angular Material. And much of the information that I'm going to share today is based on my experience doing consulting for a number of different clients, mostly business applications. I have been really fortunate to be able to use material design on a lot of projects. I know that some of you out there may have, wanted to try to move to material design, but possibly your product owners or product managers aren't too excited about completely redesigning, your UI. So hopefully after today you'll see some of the benefits and you'll be able to make a quality argument to those people and get them to try material design in some of your applications. So I got started with AngularJS material before the beta. By the time it hit 1.0, I found that using material and Angular to lay out applications and hook behaviors together was actually so efficient that I was able to skip a lot of wireframing and I could provide functional prototypes to clients in the same amount of time. If you've seen some of the other videos from past conferences like ngConf, you'll see how they kind of just throw things on the screen and you have a toolbar and you have a side nav and things like that. And once you've done that a few times, you get really fast and efficient with it. So I spent a couple years with Harris Corporation working with their R&D teams to improve their use of AngularJS. When I left there, they had moved from Bootstrap by default to material design by default on a lot of their web applications. Then I went out on my own to help companies implement and refine their implementations of Angular and material design. A lot of these companies needed help with AngularJS performance issues, which are no longer, thankfully, a big issue in Angular. A lot of help was needed with responsive layouts and just guidance on how to implement material design for their apps. I don't know if you've got any experience with call center software, but it's not usually very beautiful or fun to use. I worked with one company that was able to build out their internal call center software with material design, and within a few weeks of that being available, they were having many other project managers throughout the company contacting the VP of engineering asking when they can get their apps upgraded and on material design. So I've been working with Angular material with the Angular V2 Plus release of Angular here since the alpha is about a year ago. The experience was pretty bumpy during the alpha. If you've used Angular during the beta, you might have felt some of that pain as well. And if you used Angular during the alpha, that must have really been tough. Things were breaking every day, it seemed like. However, Angular is stable now, and the recent betas of Angular material have surpassed the functionality and capabilities of the previous AngularJS material, which is 1.0 stable release. So now Angular material is going to be entering a stable release phase. They just put out a release candidate. So it's getting to the point where you should really start to consider it for your business applications as it will be stable very soon. Thankfully, I got to spend most of 2017 working with Angular material for business applications, and the goal of this talk is really to help you see that you should probably consider it very strongly for your next business project. So we'll look at challenges faced, we'll look at some of the core concepts of material design itself, and then we'll see some examples of business applications using material design. and some of these are very critical business applications. We'll look at some of the next updates from Angular Material, and then I have some examples on Stack Blitz. Has anyone here used Stack Blitz yet? Anyone? One, two? Okay, a couple of people. If you haven't checked it out yet, definitely do. It's great for React and Angular apps. It will actually bundle your app and do the build there in the browser for you, so you don't have to mess around with a funky System.js configuration that's not quite like the app that you use. So I've got some examples using Stack Blitz that are fully functional, that are composing a bunch of Angular Material elements together to build a real business interface using menuing systems and things like that. And then we'll wrap up with some alternative design systems and technologies. So it's not a surprise to anyone here, I'm sure, that the global conversion to smartphones is happening. But many enterprise IT departments are still running critical internal software that's extremely painful to use on mobile devices. So as more millennials enter the workforce, it's getting harder and harder for IT departments to ignore internal applications with poor user experience. So unsurprisingly, I don't have permission to show any companies really ugly internal applications or any horror stories or anything like that. But I went online and I just found some public examples that are a good representation of what I've seen inside of some other companies. This example is an app by the state of California for parents who need to calculate child support payments. They just need to fill in this extremely complicated long form on a single page. And they seem to be completely unprepared for parents that may be busy, don't have time to sit down at a computer, and want to pull this up on their phone. So you can take note of some issues. On the left is desktop. There's considerable layout issues. Some of it's hard to see on the right side with the colors, but the alignment of the end of the column is not correct. There's also a expansion button that jumped all the way to the right side for some reason. So that's pretty tough to deal with just on desktop. And then on mobile, it's really daunting. And a lot of users will just see that and just say, like, I don't have time for this, or I don't want to complete this task right now. For internal business applications, that's efficiency in your business. You want your users to complete their tasks as fast as possible. And anytime that they look at a screen and say, I'm going to come and do this later, you're kind of losing efficiency. So another big piece that adds a lot of frustration here is there's a real lack of contrast. There are some different colored things here, but a lot of the most important parts of the screen don't really stand out. There's not really a good flow through the screen. So that's one example. This example is a public-facing web app for a multi-billion-dollar company, 29,000 employees. On the right side, their corporate customers use this app to book significantly large events at venues around the country. So this company owns a lot of restaurants and things like that. So every one of these big companies that books an event, that's tens of thousands of dollars for your company here. But do you think this UI meets expectations of today's HR professionals who are spending most of their day on their smartphone? And then on the left side here, the form is used by potential franchisees. So they want to apply to have a franchise of one of the restaurants for this company. So this is a really important transaction that if they complete it successfully, it could mean a lot of revenue for both sides of that partnership. But if they're using this form that's a really poor user experience, how often are they not completing that? How often are they having frustration? You have someone who might be a new partner and they're frustrated right from the beginning. Not a great user experience. So I think you can see there's lots of wasted real estate here. The space that we have that's extra, it's not really being used effectively to provide consistent spacing or alignment. And on the left, there's a lot of vertical scrolling. I could only fit one page here, but there's about 8 pages of this form that goes by. And then on the right, you can see it doesn't really adapt to the screen size. Okay, so has anyone heard about this study about flat UI? It came out a month or two ago. It was all over Twitter and whatnot. So it came out, and everyone was like, "Oh my God, flat UI! It's confusing users. It's this problem." There was a headline-grabbing title to this. So many product managers were contacting their teams and developers and saying, like, "Oh my God, like, look at these problems we're probably having with our flat UI." So if you read deeper into the article, you'll find that the eye tracking research actually confirmed the importance of a number of key design guidelines. So if you're building user interfaces and you haven't embraced the acronym CRAP yet, I highly recommend you look at it. So it stands for contrast. Your important interactive UI elements need to stand out from the others. Repetition, consistent UI patterns train the user's brain where to look. And then you build a clear visual hierarchy through the use of alignment and proximity. This includes intelligent use of negative or white space, along with grouping items that belong together close to each other. So finally, this study hit on a key human factors issue. Complex high-density user interfaces cause users uncertainty and delay their ability to take action. So any UI that has 20, 30, 50, 70 different UI elements on it, your users are going to take a lot more time to complete their task and to finish it, and they're also going to make a lot more mistakes because they're going to feel unconfident while they're filling it out. Okay, so the study used eye tracking, and it showed a lot of these different visuals to users and asked them to complete a task. In this case, they showed on the left a non-flat design where they have a very strong signifier that there's a click here for shop pearls. And then on the right side, they went totally flat. They went super flat. And like, we'll get rid of anything that makes that look clickable. And so they tested users. And they saw that users of this flat design would try to click the header and often ignore the button completely. The header has color. It has boldness. Has a lot more of a click signifier strength than the other parts of that interface there. So material design provides a number of different button types to address this kind of situation. First, there's the flat button. It stands out through the use of contrast color in addition to capitalization. However, these buttons are not designed to be used for your more important actions. In this case, taking the user to your Pearl storefront is the primary action. So material design provides raised buttons for the cases where you want strong clickability and the user's gaze to be attracted by the color and the height of the button. So I know we haven't got into the concepts of material design yet, but I wanted to use this example to help alleviate any fears that you may have if you'd read studies like that, or you'd heard things about flat UI being a problem. So certainly you can understand why this example on the top right is a difficult interface for the user, but with material design, it's not just about making everything flat. It's also leading your users to accomplish their tasks. So now we're going to get into the basic goals and concepts of material design. The material team has put out some exquisitely crafted statements to describe their system. However, reading them often leaves people dazed and confused. It's very exquisite and wordsmithed, but I'm going to help try to connect that to something that you can understand a little bit better. So material design is a visual design language. This means consistent guidelines and a lot more depth than just interactive elements. It provides guidance on details like typography, vocabulary, and much more. The guidance is based on well-known UX principles that have years of research behind them. The design language dives into the area of physics in order to create realistic motion that directly enhances the user experience. The goal is to enable building applications that can effectively function across a wide range of devices. This means that users should be able to experience an app on different devices without having to relearn or be taught how to use each new app. In business terms, this means reduced training costs when allowing employees to switch between tablets, smartphones, and desktop monitors. Additionally, it means building voice and touch-friendly UIs, so users across your organization can interact efficiently using touchscreen monitors and mobile devices. The system is built on a metaphor of physical materials in a known space. So paper panels are restricted by the imagined physical constraints of your device. So what this really means is this imagined space is the millimeters between the glass on the front of your device and the back of your phone. So it's, you know, a centimeter or so. Or it's the space between your flat screen monitor and the back of the monitor there. So paper elements have room to be stacked and to slide around, but there's not enough room to really flip them over. So you don't see a lot of page flip animations in material design, but you will see shuffling of papers and things like that. So ink, on the other hand, is much more free. While paper is generally restricted to be rounded corner rectangles, which we'll see in a second, ink can take any shape and perform seemingly magical motions like ripples on water. So here's some examples of rounded corner rectangles. So you can have these sort of, the rounding could be 0 and it's a rectangle, or the rounding can be very high and you have a circle. So those are the general shapes of the sort of white material that you're generally working on. It can be different colors than white, and I made it gray here just so the projector won't have any problems with it. But you can see the example of what these materials look like here. So the previous material examples demonstrated the use of shadows and surfaces as well, and we'll take a look more at motion here in a minute. Materials can be stacked along the z-axis. A material that is above another material will cast a larger shadow based on how much higher it is than the other material. So the guidelines of material design encompass these key print and media design aspects. They do this with a focus on guiding user actions. Users' gaze should be attracted to the important components of the screen, and the UI should help lead them through the completion of their task. So motion is critical to material design. However, it's hard to explain motion standing here without actual motion. So got a video that will discuss and demonstrate motion and material. And my mouse is somewhere. There we go.
Material design is alive. And it lives in a world a lot like ours. A world that's responsive, natural, aware, and intentional. Material design uses responsive animation to create energy. When you take an action, feedback is immediate, and it never keeps you waiting. Motion adapts to the distance an element needs to travel, focusing on how fast something needs to move, rather than how long it should take to get there. Motion should feel natural, moving the way things do in the real world. Nothing should instantly start or stop. Elements in motion have momentum and take time to speed up and slow down. They respond to forces like gravity, moving in curved paths instead of in straight lines. Material is also aware of the world around it. The way something enters the screen can affect the movement of everything else. Elements can push other elements out of the way, or attract them. Above all, material isn't random. There's a purpose behind every animation. Motion guides you. It keeps you focused on what's important and makes sure you don't get lost. It also hints at how something might react, even before it's triggered. Whether your brand is fun and playful, or serious and straightforward, using the motion principles for material design can help you produce a quick, clear, and cohesive experience. Get to know how things move at design.google.com.
Great. There we go. Okay, as you just saw, motion is used in meaningful ways in order to increase user efficiency and confidence. It's based on physics in order to enhance the user's feeling that the UI is responding to their touch. The material design spec covers a number of mathematical formulas for you to use in your animations. They even show you the formulas in action so you can see their performance when used to animate an object. So if you go to the spec, there's a page there where they will actually show you the different calculations on Android and the web, and they'll allow you to run those side by side and see what the difference is and why those are useful and how it is a more realistic animation when using some of those. So the end result of this collection of concepts is a well thought out system that follows established design principles. Your business can directly lean on material design by pointing direct developers at the guidelines, giving them access to a material design component library, and then asking them to follow the spec as close as they can. So if you don't have designers, you can point your developers at the spec and say, work towards this. It's a good start. Use these components. You get a lot of design principles out of the box so that developers that may not be comfortable with design, they kind of have something that they can use, and it sort of just looks good and works well without a lot of effort. Of course, you get a lot more for a lot more quality if you involve designers as well. So you can ask your designers and developers to use material design as a starting point for collaboratively enhancing your company's brand and building your proprietary design language. So you can build your own company's material design theme and styling, which it doesn't have to exactly follow the material design spec. You can just use that as a starting point and you can enhance it. But with anything, you're going to want to do user research. You're going to want to see how users use the application and iterate. So I want to cover one more example in that same aspect before we move on. So again, material design is just a set of guidelines. It's not a set of rules or regulations. So it's something that enables your company to customize and push the limits of the guidelines to fit your brand, your design language, and the needs of your end users. So I just want to highlight one example that I ran into on a recent project. So according to the material design spec, list items can be clickable, and their text should generally be the same as your primary text. So here, the title text is just the same gray or black. In this case, we followed the guidelines by default and started some user testing. We use an app called Full Story, which allows you to see exactly how your users are interfacing or interacting with your website. To our dismay, many users were scrolling through our list and paging through the list, but they were never clicking on any of the list items. So a lot of the value of our application is actually after they click into one of those items. So they were just missing out on a lot of the value of our application. So in order to fix this, we added an underline which is a strong clickability signifier. And we added our primary color to the names of the list items. So this isn't technically in the material design spec, but it's really up to us to see what our users expect, what they need to recognize these as interactive elements. And we're able to add this. And within the same day of getting this out, we're quickly seeing users, almost every user was clicking on these and interacting, getting more deeply into the application. And then we went a little bit farther, added some instructions to a card on top of the page. So this is just a part of the process of using the material design spec, but then iterating with some user research, user observation to improve your app. Next, I want to highlight some standout business applications built with material design. So Harris Corporation, who's right here in Central Florida, in Melbourne, they've been using material design for a couple of years. This application is used by international air navigation service providers, airports and airlines, and they use it to share real-time aviation advisories. So the tool and its use of material design helps increase operational efficiency and seamless communication across air traffic borders. So obviously, very important, critical use case. And this is built with AngularJS material. So it's still got a lot of capitals, all caps and things in there, which from a consumer standpoint might seem like not a great UI, but actually in aviation, that's what they expect. Everything they read is like these all caps, airport codes and waypoint codes and things like that. So just separating and allowing this information to be separated in a visual way is a big step forward from what was available before. So another example, ProsperWorks is a business-to-business software as a service startup. It was founded just 4 years ago. Their use of material design is well coordinated across Android, iOS, and the web. Customers and investors have embraced their product, which greatly improves upon the UX of traditional CRM software. So in this incredibly mature and competitive market of CRM, which if you've ever looked at it, there's 800 CRMs, there's 100 different open source and free CRMs. This company is still seeing very strong success. Just last month, they raised $53 million, and a lot of that is based upon the user experience and just how much users enjoy working with their application. So I'm going to show some of the examples of this business-focused application. On this example here, note the meaningful use of white space and typography to create a visual hierarchy. So you can see the labels are smaller and they have less contrast. And this allows the data to really stand out on the screen. So, there we go. A number of different navigation components are used. In this case, there's 3 tabs. You can also see the use of a floating action button, or a FAB, here. This is used for the primary action on the screen. And in this case, that's the creation of a new activity record. Icons are used to great effect throughout the app. This screen also demonstrates the use of a material list. Form editing is clean and intuitive. And here's another material list with a different set of features. The FAB allows creation of a new task. Tapping the checkbox allows for toggling completion of a task. And tapping on the text of a list item opens that individual task. ProsperWorks uses colors to indicate where a user has moved or when a user has moved into a different section of the app. In this case, they move from projects to the tasks section. So the previous examples were built with native Android SDKs. Their web app is using Ember. And in this case, note how the application divides and makes use of the extra screen real estate on desktop. One area is for navigation, Then the remaining 3 areas are broken up into separate interactive sections. These map directly to the tabs that we saw on mobile. So now we're able to just break that out and see all of them at the same time. So we have editing the project in the first, logging of activities in the second, and then the third allows you to manage your tasks and other related data. Note how these sections are just the same as on the mobile tabs. That's something that you can repeat, but it's not something that you have to do. This is an application of the material design transform pattern. So they're transforming from tabs into these different sections. That's a very common pattern, and there's many different patterns like that are defined and well described in the spec under the layout section in a section called responsive UI. So now we've covered concepts of material design and seen it in action. Now let's get into the specifics related to Angular. First release candidate came out last week. This is a very significant milestone. I think it's been 2 years or so now. So we finally have a release candidate. There was a few breaking changes with prefixes in the last beta release, but the team provided a great tool that just allows you to point it at your TS config, run the tool, and it will update your entire application to migrate your prefixes over. I've used it on a few projects and it has been great. So this change from MD to MAT is really going to help with the NG upgrade story. If you're upgrading from AngularJS material to Angular material, there's no more chance for conflicts or anything there. The component dev kit has been extracted from the core project, and documentation was just made available this last month. Jeremy Elborn gave a great talk on the CDK at Angular Mix last month at Universal. And then if you want a deeper dive, Christian from the Angular material team gave a talk available on YouTube, and when I share my slides, you'll have access to those links. Or you can just search CDK on YouTube and you should find it. Just as, what is the CDK? So it's a component development kit that gives you things like helpers for overlays and panels, as well as bidirectionality, has some platform features, has a bunch of other features that really are needed to build Angular material, but then they're kind of generic to any component UI. So they pulled those out separately so that other UI developers and UI component developers can leverage those. And you may find reasons to use those in your app. They're also there to allow you to build, some sort of component UI that isn't material design, but still use a lot of the same tooling. So all of the goals in the Q3 roadmap have been met, and the team just posted the Q4 roadmap a couple weeks ago. Really, the primary goal is get a stable release. They want to line up Angular 5.0.0 along with Angular Material 5.0.0. It may not be those exact version numbers, but they're going to try to get onto the same cadence of releases as Angular. So what is new? Dynamically nested menus was a big ask for enterprise customers. They want to be able to, have a complete, deep, hierarchy of menus for all their different applications. Now that's available. A new stepper component. So if you want to implement the wizard design pattern, they have a bunch of out-of-the-box pieces here that you just kind of, put your form inside of that. And then they have, for this one, they have a CDK and a material version. So if you use the CDK version, you can use that in your non-material app. And then for business, AngularJS material, for years, people have been like, when do we get a material data table? And building a data table is not easy. A lot of companies spend a year or two to get something that's like pretty good. So Angular material team has got this for Angular material. There's a CDK version. So you can have like an HTML table that uses the CDK, and it will look like an HTML table, but you have sorting and you have all these nice features. And then you can style it however you want. Or you can use the material table, and it will look like a very nicely styled material table. So what's a table without some paging? Angular Materials got this covered. You see that at the bottom here. I actually went to the spec and I implemented one of these exactly like this in my own application, and then I think it was a week later, Angular Material released their pager. So I was actually very happy to not have to maintain that code anymore and just replace it with the Angular Material version. So sorting of styled and unstyled tables is supported. So you can see there's just a little arrow there. It toggles. They have some nice APIs for setting up sorting. Expansion panels. These were almost impossible to implement in AngularJS material. But the new Angular Animations package from Matthias has made this possible in Angular material, and it's quite easy. So this component is great for search panels and things like that a lot of line of business applications just overuse all the time. There's a search panel, there's a grid, and just repeat. So they've also added customization of autocomplete and date picker panels. So in these examples, I was just having fun. Don't copy this, because on the right, the contrast is probably not really good there. There's a little bit of pink and purple. It's a little too close. But it was just showing that you can now get access to these panels, which on the DOM, these are completely separate. So that input, it's not a parent of the actual pop-up panel. That's completely somewhere else. But now you're able to put a class on there, and you're able to hit that with your styling and completely style those pop-ups. Note that this requires view encapsulation none on your component or doing the styling via your global styles file. So just make sure that you keep your styles targeted to that class only. So Angular Material has all these components, and some people have seen lots of examples of, okay, I can see a checkbox, I can see a button, but how do I put all this together? And so what I've done is I've gone through on StackBlitz, and I've created a number of demos with working examples of a number of these components composed together. So the first one is really simple. It's just tabs, tab navigation. Let's see here. Switch over. So this is just, this is tricky. Where's my mouse? Okay, it's not working out very well. There it is. Okay, so just basic tabs. I got some examples here on how to set that up. Not too much to see there. The next one is responsive button bar. Okay, so this one is going to use So it's going to use words on a larger screen. And then as you get down to a smaller screen, it's going to drop that into an overflow button, overflow menu. You'll see this a lot on Android. And you'll get a menu there. And then I can actually, for different screen sizes, say how many elements should be in the button bar and how many in the menu, and responsively handle that, as well as there we go. I don't know why it makes me go that small. As well as going all the way down to just an icon bar. So that is an example that's commonly needed in enterprise applications, because often there's so many navigation options that you need to have a much larger display. Where that last example was 3 tabs, I recommend that you really don't go over 5 tabs because it starts to get just too hard. Tabs are great for discoverability because the user can see like all those names right there. But when it gets to too many tabs, something like this is a little bit better for responsiveness. Okay. And then, so this example is one that I don't highly recommend, but I have seen corporate customers who they had to have it all visible and they had to have it all one click away. And so this flowing button bar really makes it so everything is discoverable, everything's one click, and you get to the next thing. Depends on your use case, your users, what you're trying to do, but in certain cases this can be a nice pattern to follow. This is kind of outside of the spec, but we're using a lot of material design elements to accomplish this. And then we've got navigation here. So I talked about the nested menus. So I have an example of this, multiple of these. And really there's no documentation for this yet. So these examples are really helpful because I don't think many other people have actually gotten the dynamic nested menus working. And so this is actually pulling, it's all just a JSON structure. And so this could be dynamically coming in from a REST API or something like that. And you can build out fully dynamic nested menus. So example right there of doing that. It's doing some interesting things with menu item component here, where it's actually got some inputs here of passing in a set of children, and then it's basically recursively there's menu items within menu items, and it sets up all of the click handlers and all of the menus so that each menu gets created properly. And then for mobile, you're going to want to have a nice side nav navigation. So I have an example of that. Make this a little wider. As well as having nesting, some nice animations. Of course, you could do more to make even more interesting animations, but this is just a way to do side nav navigation. So then in your application, you're going to want to probably on mobile devices have a side nav based navigation. On larger devices, you're probably going to want to have that top nav menu structure. For business customers, that's more what they're used to. They're used to having that kind of menu up there. If you're building consumer apps, you can kind of get away with keeping everything in the hamburger or kind of pushing it all into the side nav. But you have to do some user research there because that really affects your discoverability. Not everyone knows to go look here in the side nav, or not everyone's going to go dig down multiple levels into this. So just have to see what your users need. Oh boy. Okay. We're almost done here. So we already walked through all these. These are just screenshots of what you saw there. Okay, wrapping up. There are many different options for material design implementations. I've selected out a few of the best here. For Ember, I really couldn't find who the stand-up implementation was. There were many different competing implementations. But for these others, there are multiple for each one, but I picked out a link here for the top implementation. Couple to call out here, material components for the web. These are framework independent components. So if you're doing vanilla JS, that's one to look at. And then Polymer is for if you're doing web components. So lots of options. You're not stuck to just using Angular material. You can use a lot of these different options and still get a nice material application. So material may not be the best fit for your company for some reason. That could be design aesthetics, it could be political, it could be all sorts of reasons. So I wanted to call out some other important options here. I feel like having a design system with your company is really important. Whether you can leverage an existing one or you need to create your own, material design as well as Clarity and Lightning, they have a nice recipe, and so you can either reuse that and change some things, or you can just take the components and then build out your design completely from scratch based on those same sort of components and elements that go into that design system. So a couple here ready to go, built for Angular today. And then there's a few others, including the US government has their own design specification for building user interfaces. So if you are restricted to that option, I haven't seen anyone implement that in Angular or React, but it's probably coming, maybe. And then Fluent Design got really hot during build. Everyone's talking about it. Microsoft's got their new thing. It works with Halo and 3D and VR, and it was kind of announced, and they're working on having it as part of a Windows 10 build. But that's like the reference implementation that they're working on the initial alpha. So there's no library out there that implements Fluent Design. There's no Angular or Vue package for that. The design system itself is very much still a work in progress. And just like Material saw, there was big updates to the spec in the first year or two. You can expect that happening with Fluent as well. So if you were to go try to build a component set, you're probably going to see a lot of breaking changes over the next year or so. But something to keep an eye on, especially if VR is something you're doing. So in summary, material design is flexible enough for most enterprise applications. Angular Material is getting much more stable and should have a 1.0 or 5.0 release soon. If you're starting a new project, you should seriously consider Angular Material. And if your company is looking for something different, I still recommend that you standardize on a design system for use across your enterprise. The material design spec lays out a lot of the groundwork, and it's just up to your designers to build on top of that and build out your brand design. Okay, I have lots of references. I'll share the slides on Twitter, and please feel free to hit me up in the hallways or online for questions. Thank you very much.